It was the kind of August morning that made Flagstaff feel like the most beautiful place on earth. The ponderosa pine still holding the night's cool air. The sky that particular shade of blue that only exists at 7,000 feet. The smell of pine resin and dry grass coming through the kitchen. Screen door. Patricia Cole was standing at the stove making oatmeal with brown sugar, the way Ryan liked it. He was 6 years old. He was sitting at the kitchen table in his pajamas with his sneakers already on, which was a thing he had started doing recently, sleeping with his shoes by the bed so he could put them on the moment his feet hit the floor, as if the day might start without him if he wasn't ready. He had a plastic dinosaur in his left hand. He was making it walk across the edge of the table. At some point between 8:45 and 9 o'clock on the morning of August 14th, 1981, Ryan Cole walked out the back screen door of that house on Whispering Pines Drive and was not seen again for 44 years. That is not a story about a child who wandered into the woods and got lost. That is a story about a man who had been watching that family for weeks, who knew the layout of that yard, who knew that Patricia had 30 seconds of her back turned to the stove, and who had been planning for exactly that 30 seconds. It took 44 years, one National Missing and Exploited Children database cross-reference, one genealogical DNA analysis, and a man in Bakersfield, California, who did not know his own real name to finally bring the truth back to Flagstaff. But before we get to what investigators found in California, you first have to understand what was left behind in Arizona. Because to understand what this case cost the Cole family across 4 decades, you first have to understand who Ryan Cole was and what that kitchen table looked like on the morning everything changed. Flagstaff, Arizona in 1981 was a university town with a small-town soul, a place where the elevation kept the summers cool, where Northern Arizona University gave it just enough bustle to feel alive, and where the neighborhoods on the east side of town, the ones tucked into the pines, still had the quiet of places that hadn't yet discovered that they were worth protecting. Whispering Pines Drive was that kind of street. Screen doors, gravel driveways, neighbors who brought casseroles when someone had a bad week and didn't wait to be asked. Patricia Cole was 33 years old and taught 2nd grade at Thomas Elementary, which meant that every August was the dual excitement of her own children going back and her classroom waiting. She had 2 sons, Ryan, 6, who would start 1st grade in 3 weeks, and Kevin, 9, who had just graduated to the kind of independence where he was allowed to ride his bike to the community pool by himself and felt enormous about it. Their father, Gary Cole, worked shift maintenance at the Flagstaff Medical Center and was a man who fixed everything: the wobbly porch step, the screen door that stuck, the carburetor on the station wagon, with the quiet competence of someone who believed that things worth having were worth maintaining. Ryan was the younger one, and knew it, and had developed, in the way of younger siblings, a creative strategy for compensating. He collected dinosaurs. He had 14 of them, named individually, organized by size on the shelf above his bed, and he could tell you the difference between a Brachiosaurus and a Camarasaurus with a patience and seriousness that delighted every adult he explained it to. His kindergarten teacher had sent home a note that spring saying Ryan was one of those children who made a classroom feel warmer. Patricia had kept the note in the junk drawer in the kitchen, which was where she kept the things that mattered most. He loved oatmeal with brown sugar. He put his shoes on before he was fully awake. He had a laugh, his grandmother would describe it, years later, in a way that never changed no matter how many times she said it, like a small engine starting up. The summer had been good. They had driven to the Grand Canyon in the station wagon the week before, the boys arguing in the back seat over a comic book for the first 100 miles and then falling asleep against each other. Patricia had taken a photograph at the South Rim. Kevin with his arm around Ryan, Ryan squinting into the sun, grinning. the plastic brachiosaurus visible in his shirt pocket. She did not know, standing there at that rim, that she had 3 days left with him. The backyard of the house on Whispering Pines Drive was not large. A rectangle of dry grass, a pine tree at the corner, a wooden fence on 3 sides. The gate in the fence faced the alley. It was the kind of gate that latched from the inside and had a spring that pulled it shut. The kind of gate a 6-year-old could open, but that would close itself behind him. At 9:02 that morning, Patricia turned from the stove with the bowl of oatmeal, and the kitchen was empty. The back screen door was swinging. The plastic dinosaur was still on the table. She set the bowl down. She called his name. She went to the back door and looked into the yard. Empty. She went to the front door and looked up and down the street. Empty. She called his name again, louder. By 9:15, she was going door to door. By 9:40, a neighbor had called the Flagstaff Police Department. By 10:30, 6 patrol officers were canvassing the neighborhood and the surrounding woods. Officer Dale Hutchins, 29 years old and 4 years on the force, was the first responder and the one who would carry this case for the next decade in his mind, even after it left his active caseload. He noted the open gate. He noted the alley. He walked the alley in both directions and found nothing. He noted in his report that the gate's spring mechanism was in working order, that it would have pulled shut behind anyone who passed through it, which meant the gate had not been left open by a child wandering out. It had been opened, and then it had closed. Kevin Cole came home from his friend's house at noon and found his mother on the front porch surrounded by neighbors. He asked where Ryan was. His mother looked at him for a moment that he would remember for the rest of his life and did not answer immediately. He understood, in that pause, more than any child should have to understand. The search expanded through the afternoon. Helicopters from the Coconino County Sheriff's Department ran grid patterns over the pine forest east of the neighborhood. Volunteers, organized by the Flagstaff Fire Department, worked a half-mile perimeter. The National Guard was requested. Gary Cole arrived from the hospital still in his work clothes and walked the woods until midnight, calling his son's name into the dark. There was one item in the alley that Officer Hutchins bagged and logged. A single cigarette butt, filterless, brand unknown, approximately 8 feet from the gate. It was the only thing in that alley that had no explanation. He noted it carefully. He sent it to the lab. In 1981, a cigarette butt was a cigarette butt. There was nothing more to learn from it with the technology available. The lab report came back inconclusive. The butt was stored in a sealed evidence bag and placed in the case file. It would stay there for 42 years. By the end of the first week, investigators had one theory they did not want to name publicly and could not disprove privately. Ryan had not wandered. Someone had taken him. Someone who knew when to be at that gate. A man named Gerald Rourke, 38 years old, had been seen in the neighborhood 3 times in the 2 weeks prior to Ryan's disappearance. Once by a neighbor watering her garden, once by a woman walking her dog, once by Patricia herself, who had noticed a truck parked on Whispering Pines Drive for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, and had thought nothing of it. Rourke lived in Prescott Valley, 60 miles south. He had 2 prior arrests for unrelated offenses and no known connection to the Cole family. Investigators interviewed him twice. They could not place him on Whispering Pines Drive on August 14th. He passed a polygraph examination. By December of 1981, he had been eliminated as a suspect. The case file grew heavy with dead ends. A reported sighting in Phoenix in October, a boy matching Ryan's description at a gas station on I-17, sent investigators south for 2 weeks and yielded nothing. A second reported sighting in Tucson in January of 1982 sent them south again. Both reports were genuine in the sense that the people who made them believed what they saw. Neither report held up. Patricia Cole gave a press conference in September of 1981, standing on the same front porch where she had stood surrounded by neighbors the afternoon of the disappearance. She held Ryan's second-grade school photograph, the one that would appear on missing child posters across Arizona for the next decade. She said she was asking anyone with any information to call the tip line. She said Ryan liked dinosaurs and oatmeal with brown sugar. She said he put his shoes on before he was fully awake. She did not cry at the press conference. She would say, years later, that she made a decision standing at that podium. She was not going to perform her grief for anyone. Her grief was for her family. What she owed the public was information. She was the most composed person at that podium. She was also the most destroyed. The years move the way years do when the thing you are waiting for does not come. By 1985, 4 years after Ryan's disappearance, Kevin Cole was 13 and had become, by necessity, the kind of teenager who did not let himself need things his parents were too depleted to give. He helped with dinner. He mowed the lawn without being asked. He learned early that the grief in that house had a shape and a weight, and that you had to walk around it carefully, or it would knock you flat. Gary Cole left the family in 1989. It was not a dramatic departure. There was no single event, no final argument. There was simply the accumulated weight of 8 years of a marriage trying to carry something too heavy, and one morning Gary said quietly that he thought he needed to go, and Patricia said she understood, and they sat at the kitchen table where Ryan had walked his dinosaur, and were kind to each other about the ending of a thing they had both loved. Kevin was 17. He watched his father pack his truck and drove him to his new apartment and helped him carry boxes and came home and made dinner. By 1994, 13 years after the disappearance, Patricia was still teaching second grade at Thomas Elementary. She had requested, every year since 1981, to be assigned the same classroom, room 14, with the window that faced the playground, and the principal had honored this, everyone understanding without saying so that the classroom was a way Patricia stayed connected to the age Ryan had been. She kept his school photograph on her desk. Not the missing child poster photograph, but a different one. A snapshot from that last Grand Canyon trip. Ryan squinting into the sun, grinning, the Brachiosaurus in his shirt pocket. Every August 14th, she took the day off. Kevin Cole became a high school history teacher in Flagstaff. He married a woman named Helen in 1997, and they had a daughter named Clara in 1999. When Clara was 6 years old, Kevin sat with her one evening and told her she had an uncle named Ryan who had disappeared before she was born. He showed her the Grand Canyon photograph. Clara looked at it for a long time and then asked if they were still looking for him. Kevin said yes. He said they would always be looking. By 2010, 29 years after the disappearance, Ryan's missing child poster had been digitized and uploaded to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database. A facial aging projection had been generated, a computerized estimate of what Ryan Cole might look like at 35. The projection showed a man with Patricia Cole's jawline and Gary Cole's eyes. It was studied carefully by the Cold Case Unit. It was studied carefully by Patricia, who kept a copy in the same kitchen drawer where she had kept Ryan's kindergarten teacher's note for 30 years, and who looked at it sometimes and tried to see her son in a face that was a guess. She believed he was alive. She had believed it since 1981, and she had never found a reason convincing enough to make her stop. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research. verifying facts, and piecing together lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what makes this possible. Now let's get back to Ryan Cole. The case had been cold for 41 years when Detective Sonia Marsh of the Flagstaff Police Department Cold Case Unit submitted the evidence from the original case file for reanalysis in 2022. She was 34 years old and had been assigned the Cole file as one of 14 open cold cases upon joining the unit in 2019. She had read the original reports. She had read Officer Hutchins's notes. Hutchins had passed away in 2014, but his supplemental notes, compiled over the decade after his retirement, were in the file. She had looked at the facial aging projection, and she had looked at the Grand Canyon photograph. She had called Patricia Cole, who was then 74 years old and still living in the house on Whispering Pines Drive. She told me, Marsh would say afterward, that she never changed Ryan's room. She said she wanted him to be able to find his way back to it. The cigarette butt from the alley had been in its sealed evidence bag for 41 years. Modern forensic DNA analysis is capable of extracting a full genetic profile from a source as minimal as a single skin cell transferred to a cigarette filter during handling. What takes the process further is genealogical DNA analysis, uploading the extracted profile to public ancestry databases, and tracing the family tree of an unknown contributor through their distant relatives. The same way people trace their own heritage online, working backward through generations until a name emerges. The process takes time. It requires a genealogist trained in the technique, meticulous cross-referencing of public records, and a database large enough to contain a distant relative of the unknown contributor. In the Cole case, it took 14 months. In March of 2024, Detective Marsh was at her desk on a Tuesday afternoon when her phone rang. The genealogist she had contracted, a woman named Dr. Patricia Osai of the University of Arizona's Forensic Genomics Lab, said 4 words before anything else. "I have a name," she said. The name was Walter Ames. He was 71 years old in 2024. He had lived in Bakersfield, California for the previous 26 years, where he worked as a self-employed handyman and lived alone in a 2-bedroom house on the east side of the city. His neighbors described him as a quiet man. Polite, he had a dog. He kept his property tidy. He had no criminal record in California. He had never appeared in any Flagstaff database or any Arizona database after 1983. Before 1983, records show Walter Ames had lived in Prescott Valley, Arizona. He had worked between 1979 and 1981 as a part-time groundskeeper for a residential property management company whose service territory included the East Flagstaff neighborhoods, including the streets around Whispering Pines Drive. Court documents filed in May of 2024 confirmed that Ames had worked properties within 4 blocks of the Cole house on at least 6 separate occasions between June and August of 1981. He had been in that neighborhood. He had a reason to know it, and for 43 years, no one had connected him to the alley behind the house on Whispering Pines Drive because no one had been able to read what was in that cigarette butt. Detective Marsh flew to Bakersfield with a Flagstaff detective named Chris Vella on April 3, 2024. They did not call ahead. They parked 2 houses down from Ames's address and watched the house for 40 minutes. At 7:40 in the morning, Walter Ames came out his front door to collect his newspaper. He was a thick-set man with gray hair, walking slowly, wearing a flannel shirt. Marsh and Vella got out of the car and walked toward him. But what they found inside that house, in a room Ames had kept locked, what no one had prepared themselves to find, was not just evidence of what had happened in 1981. There was a man, living in that house. His name, as he had been told it his entire life, was Daniel Ames. He was 48 years old. He had Walter Ames's last name, Walter Ames's face and his childhood photographs, Walter Ames's Social Security records for the first decade of his life. He had been homeschooled and moved frequently, and had been told, when he asked about his past, that his mother had died, and that his father had brought him west when he was very young, and that there was nothing left of the life before. He had no dinosaurs. He had no memory of oatmeal with brown sugar. He had no memory of a kitchen table on Whispering Pines Drive. But the Bakersfield Police Department forensic team took a DNA sample from him that same morning. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children database had carried his genetic profile through his mother Patricia since 2003. The match came back the following day. Daniel Ames was Ryan Cole. He was alive. He had been alive every year of those 44 years. He had been 30 miles from the Arizona state line for the previous 26 of them. Walter Ames was arrested in his front yard on April 4, 2024, as Ryan, as Daniel, watched from the window of the house they had shared for 2 decades. He was charged with kidnapping, child abduction, and a series of connected federal charges. He did not speak during the arrest. He did not look at the man in the window. He was placed in the back of a patrol car, and the door was closed, and Bakersfield went on around him the way cities do when something that happened 44 years ago finally reaches forward and takes hold. The legal proceedings that followed established, through records and testimony, that Walter Ames had taken Ryan Cole in a planned abduction and had relocated twice, first to New Mexico, then to California, to prevent discovery. He raised the boy as his son. He kept him isolated from the kinds of institutional contact, schools, doctors with records, social services, that might have surfaced questions about the child's origins. He was, by every account of neighbors and people who knew him across those years, an unremarkable man. A quiet man. The kind who waved from across the road. He entered a guilty plea in September of 2024. He was sentenced to 31 years in federal prison. He was 71 years old at sentencing. Patricia Cole was 76 years old when Kevin called her from Bakersfield on the afternoon of April 4, 2024. She was in the kitchen. He called because Detective Marsh had asked whether the family wanted to receive the news by phone or in person. And Patricia had said by phone because she wanted to be in her kitchen when she heard it, the way she had been in her kitchen the morning it all started. Kevin's voice broke twice before he finished telling her. Patricia let him finish. Then she asked one question. "Is he all right?" Kevin said yes. He said his brother was alive and he was in Bakersfield and he was going to be all right. She stood in that kitchen for a long time after. She looked at the back screen door, still on its original hinges, the spring mechanism still pulling it shut the way it had pulled it shut 44 years ago. Then she opened the junk drawer and took out Ryan's kindergarten teacher's note, still there, still folded the same way, and held it. The reunion, when it came, was private. No cameras, no press. A house in Bakersfield rented for the occasion, Patricia and Kevin and Gary, who had driven up from Tucson, and a man named Daniel, who was also Ryan, and who sat across from them at a table and knew very little about oatmeal with brown sugar, but wanted to learn. Kevin brought the Grand Canyon photograph. Daniel held it for a long time. He looked at the small boy squinting into the sun with a plastic dinosaur in his shirt pocket, the older brother's arm around his shoulders, and something moved across his face that his mother recognized from 44 years away. "That laugh," she said. She said it was still there, still exactly like a small engine starting up. Ryan Cole, Daniel Ames, both names, neither fully right yet, a new name still being built, was alive. He was 50 years old. He had a future he had not been allowed to choose, and had been told a lie so total it had become his life. And now the lie was ending, and the truth was beginning, and there was no word yet for what comes after that. But he was alive. And the room on Whispering Pines Drive was still waiting for him. Unchanged, the dinosaurs still on the shelf, organized by size. Patricia had kept them dusted. What do you do with 44 years of not knowing whether someone you love is dead or alive, with the particular grief of a wound that was never allowed to close or to heal, only to persist? What does it mean that the cigarette butt in that alley sat in an evidence bag for 41 years, while a boy grew into a man 30 miles from the state line, believing a name that wasn't his? And when Ryan Cole eventually decides what name he wants to carry through the rest of his life, whose son he is in the eyes of the world and in his own, what does that choice say about what it means to know where you come from? Leave those thoughts in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. And tell us, is this justice? After 44 years, after a lifetime given away without consent, after a man who spent 30 years waving from across the road, is what came after the arrest enough? Ryan Cole was 6 years old when he disappeared from a backyard in Flagstaff, Arizona, with a plastic dinosaur on the kitchen table and shoes already on his feet. He was 50 years old when his family found him. The years between those two moments cannot be returned to him. But truth found him. After 44 years, truth found him. If you believe that matters, if you believe the finding is worth something, even when the losing cost everything, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.